Hello and welcome to another magical Saturday stream. I am your host, JoeMagician, and today we're going to be investigating the enigma of one of Fire and Blood's most elusive characters and the last member of House Strong. Wink on that one. That is, of course, Lord Larys the Clubfoot. Sort of an amalgamation of several different schemers from the main books. Obviously, Varys, Littlefinger, the Shave paid a little bit, and quite a few other characters who play. Larys ends up playing a pivotal role in the Dance of the Dragons from beginning to honestly end. Last week we talked a lot about Bloodraven and how similar he is to Larys Strong, and we'll be exploring that in a little bit more detail today. And also how Larys should not only play a major role in House of the Dragon, the upcoming HBO show, which you guys should all be excited about like I am, because of how much House Strong's going to be on the screen for once. But I think he also does a lot of double duty here as major foreshadowing for several characters and plots in The Winds of Winter. You know, Larys is all about that hustle. He's doing everything. He's working for one show, he's working in another book, he's foreshadowing for a book that hasn't even come out yet. You know, he's a relatively important character in a meta sense, and somebody that there's a lot of value in paying attention to. Oboe soon. Yep. Cue the oboes. I'm positive it's not an oboe. Somebody corrected me about this. No pumpkin spice seltzer. I didn't do that. Although that is for sale from Bud Light. You can buy a Bud Light pumpkin spice seltzer. God help us all. Hey guys. Going. Before we get going, just some more promo stuff. As per usual, if this is your first time here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the bell button for notifications. YouTube is very bad about sending those out, so if you don't have, even if you subscribe, it may not tell you when I go live unless you hit the bell thing and say allow notifications. Also, slam that like button, like bucket. Yeah, I should get a like bucket and just like put it right here. Drop some likes in there as we go. YouTube is a very fickle mistress, and it relies on signals from the viewers that you are liking what you are watching. So slamming the like button always helps. As per usual, we get 150 likes during the course of the stream. I will put on the George R. R. Martin hat, the very special one, which is out of reach at the moment. It's kind of across the room. But yeah, 150 likes. You guys slam it and spend the rest of the stream wearing that. We get to 200 like we did last week for Bloodraven, and we're going to go full magician. We're going to go full Gandalf Hedge Wizard style. It's going to be great. And, share the stream anywhere you can. Appreciate it when you guys do that. Upcoming stuff, you should expect to see chapter 6 of Dying of the Light read through come out around the 15th. What's today? The 11th? Yeah, that'll be out around the 15th. And chapter 7 of Dying of the Light will be around towards the end of the month. So get ready for that stuff. I haven't decided what we're going to be doing for the next stream yet. I put a link up. You'll see it at the end of this one. There's a feature where YouTube allows you to like specify where you're going next. Not really sure what it will be, but it will be in 2 weeks, not next week. I have to unfortunately work this coming weekend, so just gonna skip a week. That's how it goes. Maybe more on Bloodraven, maybe more on Larys. There's a lot here. I tried my best to include everything, but there's a lot of content about Larys, especially stuff that's not especially surface level. Oh, did I get new patrons? Hang on a second. Join Yes, thank you for joining to my Patreon at patreon.com/JoeMagician. Rachel Webb, the Archmaester. She signed up. Thank you very much, Rachel. Appreciate it. Wait, she told me a special. Wait a second. Did I just forget the name? Lady Rachel of House Webb, distantly related to the Webbers and Lady Rohane, I assume. Oh my god, you guys are talking about those seltzers? I saw them in the liquor store and I just went the other way. They were gross. Oh, super chat here from Kraken Queen 25 PLN. Excited about the Larys Strong stream. As always, thanks for the great content. No, thank you, Kraken Queen. Appreciate the tip. Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of Larys today. I was rereading stuff over the last few days and seeing all the different connections and the way George is using him. He's probably the most well developed of any member of House Strong in the story, except for like the secret ones that me and Amanda think are true, like Dunk and Brienne and those kind of characters. But he's also very different from the rest of them, so this is a good one. Oh yeah, and if you want to support me, obviously there's super chats available. There's links in the description for other ways like Patreon. I think my PayPal's in there, maybe. I don't know. I know Danny McKay sent me one before we started. Thanks very much, Danny. Peace sign right back at you. And also, yeah, my Patreon at patreon.com/JoeMagician, where you get access to content early. You get to see behind the scenes stuff, like outtakes from the the Dying of the Light stuff that Marion. Actually, I have another one of those that I have to post. I haven't done yet. I'll probably put that up after the stream. So all of the good things, and with that, slam that like bucket. Let's get going here on old Larys Strong. And we got the perfect quote here. And this is one of those things that George tells you that you should be thinking a lot harder about Larys than you are when you're reading Fire and Blood. Obviously, that's where he shows up the most. Here's the quote. The enigma that is Larys Strong the Clubfoot has vexed students of history for generations and is not one we can hope to unravel here. Where did his true loyalty lie? What was he about? He wove his way all through the dance of the dragons on this side and that side, vanishing and reappearing, yet somehow always surviving. How much of what he said and did was ruse? How much was real? Was he just the man who sailed the prevailing wind, or did he know where he was bound when he set out? Good questions, George. Yeah, it would be nice if he'd answer them a little bit more directly in Fire and Blood, but, you know, it's a challenge to us as a reader. Who is Larys? What does he want? George has given us the clues in Fire and Blood. Let's see if we can unravel a few and see if we can make sense of the Clubfoot himself. So the first thing to acknowledge at the start of the stream is that Larys should play an important role in the upcoming House of the Dragons TV show. Alongside Mysaria the White Worm, Larys fills the primary role of the Master and Whispers that we saw in Game of Thrones. That was obviously Varys, Littlefinger, Qyburn, a little bit of Bran at the end was doing that kind of thing. But I think he's going to be different from the other characters, in particular Varys and Littlefinger, because Larys is a character who increases in importance as the story goes on. At the beginning of the dance, he's not that important. You know, when you start Game of Thrones, Littlefinger and Varys are at the height of their powers. They have their maximum everything going on when we are introduced to them. They're in control of their spy networks. They're in control of King's Landing, all those kind of things. That should not really be Larys, at least based on the set photos and the timeline we're looking at. This is going to happen before, at least from the set photos, it looks like this is before Daemon and before the dance starts proper. So you should be looking for him to be more somebody like Qyburn, somebody who starts at a lower rank, but as a function of attrition of the rest of the members of court and skill at his job, that he should end up rising in influence and his abilities it's going to be a sort of thing where he's just going to sort of be there as a background character, and then you're going to get like a season or two and you're going to be like, wow, Larys is like behind everything. How is I didn't, my goodness, he's just everywhere. That should be largely the trajectory for the character. Yeah, shake your fist at George for not answering questions about Larys, although he sort of does. That'd be fun if somebody got a chance to ask him about him at a con or some sort of event when those end up happening, though. So yeah, he should be a key feature of the narrative, especially the one that focuses on King's Landing. He largely doesn't leave it throughout Fire and Blood, except for just a few times. Although I'm going to put a caveat on this. He probably is not going to rise in importance past what we saw from Littlefinger and Varys. You know, he's going to be a driving force behind plots and manipulations, doing dirty work behind the scenes, providing exposition and information for the rest of the characters, but he's not going to be a lead. He's not going to, you know, they're not going to push him out there as a major character, and they haven't thus far. We don't even know if Larys has been cast. I assume he has been. But on the first wave of characters HBO pushed out, no Larys Strong. But he's definitely going to be one of those characters that is secondary, but a very important secondary character, especially you know, as you get into the riots and as you get into the manipulations around the end of the dance. That should be when he takes the biggest amount of screen time. Dorish Dame, I wonder if they'll set him up in opposition to Mysaria in the show. Definitely. I think that's definitely going to be on the page. I mean, on in the cards, as it were. That you should expect to see him and Mysaria dueling, essentially, sort of like Varys and Littlefinger. Although that was one thing that was kind of played down in the show. They were at the beginning, and then they just kind of diverged. Mysaria and Larys should be in opposition to each other pretty much the whole time until Mysaria's death. Spoiler alert, Mysaria dies. So let's go into who is this Larys Strong character. He's another entry in the long line of House Strong streams at this point, and perhaps the last one for quite a while. I'm unsure if I'm going to do a Lionel Strong one. There's not a lot of information about him, and it's unclear what kind of role he's going to have in the show, if he's even been cast. Some people have speculated that I think Graham McTavish might be Lionel Strong. Maybe. It's kind of unclear. But as we get closer to House of the Dragon and more castings are made obvious, you know, that should become more clear, and that could change. You know, maybe we'll revisit these things, you know, hopefully. So Larys has been the character, though, that lurks in the shadows of all the others. The member of the family, excluding possible ancestors like Duncan Brienne, who gets far and away the most time on page and development as a character, and yet he is the most unlike the rest of the Strong clan. He could not be further from the rest of them. So Larys Strong is the second son of Lord Lionel Strong. Now, the second son aspect of Larys is something to pick up on immediately here, just like right away. George uses this designation to create certain expectations for second sons in terms of motivations and what they'll be doing in the story. And not just the Sellsword Company. You know, second sons in Westeros struggle mightily to find their place, as they are often seen as superfluous or spares, or often just ignored. Unless the family is incredibly wealthy, they will be unlikely to inherit anything from their parents unless accidents happen in front of them. They often try and become tourney knights, or they try and join the King's Guard, maybe become sellswords, that kind of thing. Because they're not going to get any holdings. The other thing they try to do often is they try to marry daughters of lords and use that to try and get themselves something as a dowry or to inherit it later. But yeah, it sets up an adversarial relationship between the second son and the rest of his family. And that's no different here for Larys Strong, in particular because the Strongs are not a powerful house. Oh, hang on a second. They are powerful right now within Fire and Blood for because Lionel's Hand of the King. But as I discussed previously, they've been able servants to the Targaryens going back to Aegon the Conqueror, with Osmond Strong serving as his Hand of the King and being one of the primary river lords who turned on Harren the Black during Aegon's invasion. But they have not really been rewarded with lands and wealth. They have been given recently Harrenhal. However, they do not have the lands or the vassals or the armies to support the blackened ruin of the fortress. Making it, again, as I've said before, Harrenhal is essentially a white elephant gift. I think that's the term for it. It's great to have, but you have to be super wealthy and powerful to be able to maintain it, and they're not. That's not who they are. And as we learn later in Fire and Blood, there's actually a lot of members of House Strong in the area. So as a young man growing up, there would have been a lot of competition for attention among himself, his cousins, his second cousins, his siblings, and bastards. You know, that's the whole thing about the Strongs, is they end up creating a tremendous amount of bastards. So there would have been Lucamore the Lusty's descendants there. There would have probably been bastards from Lionel. That's what Alice Rivers is rumored to be. There's Simon Strong and his sons, bastards from them, more cousins. There's like a Frey-like amount of Strongs hanging around Harrenhal. So it's hard to stand out. Liat Rubenseld, how is he different from the rest of his family? We're going to get to that one. Don't you worry. Yeah, it's a high maintenance castle, and they don't have the money or power. Remember, when Harren the Black built Harrenhal, he did it with 3 kingdoms to support it. When you're given Harrenhal afterwards, you're basically just given the castle and the lands around the God's Eye and said, make it work. Well, you can't make it work, because it was the way you properly maintain it and arm it is you have to essentially use slave labor like Harren the Black did, and 3 kingdoms worth of income and looting in order to do it. They don't have it. There may be a curse too. Yes, there may be a curse. I disagree on the curse, but, you know, being given something you can't afford to keep is a curse in its own way. Just a monetary leeway. I think that's a word. Maybe it's a word. I'm not really sure. Yeah, that's right, Mallory. The second son thing makes me think of Amanda's Grey King theory. It's a recurring theme from the small scale to the mythical scale throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. Second sons are fucked over. And it ends up being a primary way that George motivates a lot of his characters. It's known that Lionel Strong and his predecessors did manage to create a small fortune for themselves, but, you know, not holdings to go with it. Throughout their time, they did not acquire the lands around Harrenhal. They didn't take anything back from the Tullys in order to make it palatable to essentially repair or man Harrenhal. And that's another thing. They were not able to repair it. It doesn't even look like they tried. If you could repair it, this would actually be a way to make it so that the second sons and the cousins and stuff like that have something to do, because Harrenhal is so large that each one of the towers is basically the size of another castle in Westeros, like a good-sized castle. So in theory, you could just kind of chop it up if you could repair it and give each tower to a different son, give each one to a different uncle or something like that, with all of it under, like, basically a small 7 kingdoms. They can't do that because they don't have the money. So, alas, Larys is getting nothing out of this deal. Harwin's in front of him. And there's no reason to think that's going to go the other way. So, Larys grows up in the shadow of being a second son to his older brother, Harwin Strong, aka Breakbones. What's unclear here, and this is something I'd be interested to know, is are they actually brothers or are they half-brothers? Lionel Strong had at least 3 wives and 4 children, including 2 daughters. So it's quite possible that Larys and Harwin had different mothers. It's never noted in the text, though, that they're half-brothers. So I think the assumption you're supposed to make is that they're not, but it's certainly something that could be true. That could be something that comes up in House of the Dragon. especially since that's literally the plot of the Dance of the Dragons, is that it's half siblings that end up going to war with each other. That would be kind of interesting to see. We learn nothing about his sisters. They basically disappear from the narrative. No idea what happened to them. Okay, they're just gone. Harrenhal leaves you house poor. That's right, Great Waste Tim. It is not a nice place to own. There's another complication, as I mentioned before, and this gets back to Liet's question about how is Larys different. As I mentioned before, the Strongs are historically known as great warriors and soldiers. Lucamore Strong, in particular, he's the first introduction of the family in the narrative, and he is a realm-renowned warrior. He beat down everybody. He was particularly lusty, but he was also an incredible fighter, as big and strong as a blonde bull, as he's called. Alongside, you have Harwin Strong, who again gets the same. He's almost like a Gregor-like figure. Lionel Strong, his father, is again described as a giant muscle-bound fighter. If you look at the possibilities of characters who may be Secret Strongs in the current timeline or after this, you get Duncan the Tall, you get Brienne of Tarth, maybe the Cleganes, maybe Robert Baratheon from Lucamore's children ending up at Storm's End. You know, the list goes on and on with the Strongs, that they're supposed to be these big imposing fighters. That's their thing. And then you get Larys. Larys, who's born kind of spindly, not that big, and he's born with a clubfoot. So if you're not aware of what a clubfoot is, it's basically when a child is born with one of their feet that is bent downwards and inwards rather than laying flat. It makes it really, really hard to walk on. This sets up Larys immediately as an outsider in the rest of the Strong family, as those with severe untreated clubfoots like Larys have trouble just walking, never mind the precise footwork you would need for battle or riding and all these other things. So he's kind of cut off from the family history and the lineage. He's apart from them. And in that way, Larys lives in one of George's favorite themes: cripples, bastards, and broken things. This is very, very common within the narrative. Characters that have some kind of physical impairment, or they're just not fitting into the society they're born into, in general or within their family, they have a real struggle to make a place for themselves. That's what happens to Larys. And a quote actually from Littlefinger from the show immediately comes to mind. This is Littlefinger talking about his duel with Brandon Stark. He said, "You know what I learned losing." Wow, tongue twister. "You know what I learned losing that duel? I learned that I'll never win, not that way. That's their game, their rules. I'm not going to fight them. I'm going to fuck them." Wow. That's what I know, that's what I am, and only by admitting what we are can we get what we want. And there's another quote here from Tyrion Lannister. This is from early on in Game of Thrones. He's talking to Jon Snow. He says, 14, and you're taller than I will ever be. My legs are short and twisted, and I walk with difficulty. I require a special saddle to keep from falling off my horse. A saddle of my own design, you may be interested to know. It was either that or ride a pony. My arms are strong enough, but again, too short. I'll never make a swordsman. Had I been born a peasant, they might have left me out to die, or sold me to some slavers' grotesqueries. Alas, I was born a Lannister of Casterly Rock, and the grotesqueries are all the poorer. Things are expected of me. My father was hand of the king for 20 years. My brother later killed that same king, as it turns out, but life is full of these little ironies. My sister married the new king, and my repulsive nephew will be king after him. I must do my part for the honor of my house. Wouldn't you agree? Yet how? Well, my legs may be too small for my body, my head is too large, although I prefer to think it is just large enough for my mind. I have a realistic grasp on my own strengths and weaknesses. My mind is my weapon. My brother has his sword, King Robert has his warhammer, and I have my mind. And a mind needs books as a sword needs a whetstone, if it is to keep his edge. Tyrion tapped the leather cover of the book. That's why I read so much Jon Snow. So you can apply this passage, I think, directly to Larys Strong. He has the same problems that Tyrion has within his own family. Not as extreme, but the same kind of role and the same kind of way that he's going to have to try and make his name in a way that is unusual. I do think Tyrion is definitely a character you're supposed to think of when you read Larys, along with Littlefinger and Varys. He's amalgamation of all these different characters. It's not one for one. He's not exactly like Tyrion. He's not exactly like Littlefinger. He's not exactly like Varys, but he kind of sits in the middle of them. I can imagine, in particular, a quote like this, a version of it being said by Larys in the show when he pops up, if he tries to explain himself, which they may have to do because they're going to have to do exposition on him. So something like this would make a lot of sense, especially the idea of his father that's a hand of the king, the way that his brother has his sword. You can think of Larys thinking about how Harwin has his strength in his sword. It all kind of lines up. You can see George putting effort here to make sure that you think of these different characters when you think of Larys. So this places Larys in the place that if he wants anything for himself in life, he's going to have to take it himself, and sets up an easy idea of resentment of his older brother who will get everything in Harwin. We very often see this in the narrative from characters as different from Jon Snow to Euron Greyjoy to Tyrion Lannister. What this doesn't tell us, though, is how Harwin and Larys actually felt about each other. Fire and Blood gives us no direct records of their interactions, so we're left to speculate. Purposely by George, again with his question, like, what do you think Larys is about? Well, so let's go through this. So the relationships we can draw from right off the bat are Jaime and Tyrion. Harwin is the big, brawny, powerful fighter who gets everything, and it's entirely possible that maybe he felt protective of his younger brother as Jaime did for Tyrion. Maybe he greatly enjoyed his sharp mind and wit, as Larys is also known for having. It says in Fire and Blood that he has a glib tongue. Again, that sounds like Tyrion, who's known for basically just cutting people apart with his cruel jokes. Apparently, Larys does the same thing. Although a main difference here is Larys is often known for being quiet, preferring to listen rather than talk. Although when he did, as I said, he showed tremendous wit. This is something he may have learned from his father Lionel, who was known for talking slow in a way that many mistook for stupidity. It was a way that Lionel got people to underestimate him. It made him speak less, but the words he did say would have great meaning, basically. There's also an idea here that the way that Larys feels at the end of Fire and Blood, well, his story in Fire and Blood about his Clubfoot, does bear a striking resemblance to how Tyrion feels about his dwarfism. It may be intentional, again, from George, to have the audience make the obvious parallel here for Harwin and Larys to be like Jaime and Tyrion. But it's also quite possible, knowing how Harwin is a bully in the melees, getting his nickname Breakbones for intentionally injuring people, and that he's a gold cloak known for abusing his authority and size to get what he wants. He's a corrupt knight. He's a sort of a Gregor-like figure, and one who lived on impulse. So it wouldn't be surprising if Harwin didn't suddenly get to King's Landing and started acting like a dick to everybody. He very easily could have been like this in childhood, and Larys is an obvious target for abuse, especially because he's so unlike the rest of the warrior clan of the Strongs. A weakling who couldn't fight back against Breakbones. That's the kind of person that bullies go after. Somebody that they can screw with, somebody that has no chance of fighting back. That's what they like. Tyrion gets more action than Larys. That is kind of a thing that does not show up in Fire and Blood. We have no idea who Larys is attracted to, if he's attracted to anybody. Is he asexual? Is he... Who knows? It's just not on the thing, but it's not on the page. But if you're thinking of Tyrion, it may be something similar. Maybe he found his way to the brothels too. Somebody, I think Carl Karsnark, brought it up earlier in the chat that this is very much the idea of the Fisher King, the person with the injured leg. Bran has the same kind of... This is why I brought up Bran. There is a similarity between them, and perhaps their roles and the way that they interact with the world, especially going forwards. I am not versed enough on Arthurian stuff to really talk about the Fisher King and the connections, but I know they exist. So maybe ask, I bet Lady Gwyn would have a lot of good information about that. Or you guys in the chat, throw out there what you know about the Fisher King. I'm sure Larys lines up with a lot of them. Just B says, I feel like it's similar to the Green Seer thing. If you are intelligent in Green Seer's case magic, you have something else probably physical wrong with you. You can't have everything. Yeah, that's sort of the idea. George loves the idea of having characters pay for their magic with some sort of flaw in their life, some sort of shortcoming. Like Aemon, he gains his wisdom by losing his sight, basically. Bloodraven, much like Odin, loses one eye to gain his powers. You know, Bran loses his leg, loses his ability to walk, but learns to fly. That kind of thing. It's a recurring, constant thing. And especially true of somebody like George. You know, he was not able to do the same thing the other boys could, but he turned to reading. You know, that speech about Tyrion, about how he needs to sharpen his mind, that's largely how George felt growing up too. So Larys gets the same kind of treatment here. So yeah, they're going back to what I was talking about, like maybe Harwin and Larys' relationship was much more adversarial. Maybe it was a bit like Gregor and Sandor. And certainly Larys' later life and career choices, being a torturer and master of whispers, points to somebody who had to learn to fight back in a unusual way in order to get his way. Like, you can imagine that that to get out of his being tortured or being bullied by the other Strongs, or Harwin in particular, that Larys had to learn to get back at them and fight back in his own way, a little bit like Littlefinger. The quote about how Littlefinger learned his own way of fighting after he got defeated by Brandon Stark. So it could be a very similar relationship there for Larys. That's another one. It could be Littlefinger and Brandon Stark. It could be what you're supposed to think of with Harwin and Larys. And there's another intriguing parallel that comes from last week, Bloodraven and Bittersteel, especially if Harwin and Larys are actually half-brothers instead of full brothers. You know, Bittersteel was older than Bloodraven. He was physically strong. He was bullied. I mean, he was a bully. He did bully. Bloodraven, who was weaker, he was thin, he was albino, he had that weird, I forget what it was called, not the scar, but the birthmark on his face. You know, Bittersteel took joy in punishing Bloodraven when he could, and Bloodraven essentially developed as he was in response to Bittersteel's torturing and his bullying. Again, this force within Bloodraven, and what we see within many of these characters, to embrace his mind and subterfuge as a way to get back against a much more physically strong tormentor. You know, learning the passages of King's Landing, how to spy, how to inflict pain on people. You know, the lesson that Varys has later in the books where he says the value of a man's letters are more valuable than his vault. You know, the similarities between Bloodraven and Larys, minus the magic, are pretty straightforward. They seem very, very similar characters. Especially how they essentially turn the Red Keep into their own personal holdings underneath the ruler at the time. You know, that's a way to think about Bloodraven and Larys. Like, there's a question: why didn't Larys go back and take control of Harrenhal? Well, why would he? He owned the Red Keep and Maegor's Holdfast and all the dungeons. Those are his lands. The same for Bloodraven. And you know, given how Bloodraven and Bittersteel both ended up on opposing sides of a Targaryen civil war, that seems a little on the nose. And you could say that, like, oh, that's not like Jaime and Tyrion, but you know, it could be. It looks like Jaime and Tyrion are also going to end up on opposite sides of a civil war, most likely, with Jaime backing Cersei and Tyrion backing Daenerys at some point. And you know, they used to be quite close, but their relationship has soured since the death of Tywin. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. Jaime and Tyrion, Jaime and Tyrion could be the path for Harwin and Laris. Yeah, that's right, Greyways Tim. Very spiel mad that Bloodraven got to be a court, unlike the Bracken people. Yeah, that did happen. There was definitely jealousy between them. Bittersteel liked to take it out on Bloodraven by trying to beat the shit out of him. Very possible Harwin did the same to his younger brother. It would not be... It's not impossible, to say the least. So we get Larys learning a trade. After serving as Master of Laws, his father, Lionel Strong, is made Hand of the King to Viserys I after the dismissal of Lord Otto Hightower. And Lionel brings his children with him to King's Landing. We have no information on the Strong daughters, but Harwin and Larys are not allowed to just be idle members of court going to tourneys and feasts to pass the time like so many lordlings do. Lionel puts them to work. Harwin is made a captain of the Gold Cloaks under Prince Daemon Targaryen. Probably there is to spy on Daemon and to see what's going on with the Gold Cloaks. But what happens to Larys? What job is he given? Oh, he's given to the Confessors, who are the torturers and jailers of King's Landing. That's interesting. It seems Lionel wanted his sons to have jobs that matched their aptitudes. Like Harwin's size and strength made him an ideal enforcer for the Gold Cloaks. So that sort of creates the idea that Larys had a natural aptitude for causing pain to people. Because that's what the Confessors do. They torture people to get them to confess to things and to get information out of them. It's kind of strange, but I guess Lionel just embraced the fact that his son was a little psychopath and gave him a job that suited it. The work of the Confessor is much closer to what we see from Qyburn when he tortures the Blue Bard for Cersei for information, less what we see from Littlefinger and Varys. If they engage in that stuff, it doesn't really show up on the page too much. Qyburn is the better comp here for what Larys would have learned as he got his job in the Confessors and moved his way up. Think Qyburn. Yes, please slam that like button so I get to wear a silly hat. It takes a special kind of psychopath to want to be a good confessor, to know how to inflict pain, to know how to get information out of people. And these are also the guys that largely carry out the horrible things the kings order. So for instance, like the tearing out of the tongues. Side note here, when Viserys takes out the tongues of the 5 silent Velaryons for rightly calling Rhaenyra's children not Velaryons, it's highly likely that it's Larys personally who ripped out the Velaryon tongues. He would have been carrying out this stuff as a confessor. So during this time, Larys also starts taking on the role of Master Whispers alongside his torturing duties. He began learning every nook and cranny in King's Landing and the Red Keep. Now this is very, very evocative of Bloodraven and Varys, who both spent huge amounts of time learning each secret passage constructed by Maegor the Cruel. As Lord Confessor, it was also Larys' job not only to inflict pain, but to extract useful information. That's the main part of the job. So it makes sense that Lord Confessors often overlap with Master Whispers. Also, he probably would have been in charge of the Black Cells and every deep place in the Red Keep. Again, this is Varys, who pretends to be Rugen the Gallower, the jailer, whatever that word is. Except he would have just done it explicitly. That would have been his job. And while Lionel ruled the front end of the Red Keep as Hand and the realm in general, and Harwin ruled the streets of King's Landing, Larys began expanding control over the King's Landing underworld. It also seems extremely likely, this isn't explicitly said, but Larys learned during this time to be a master of the skies like Bloodraven and Varys, as despite, his identifying Clubfoot, he's known to be able to disappear and for months safely and not be found until he wants to. So you have to assume not only is he good at using the tunnels and the secret passages, but he can just shed Larys Strong and become another person almost at a whim. That's something he has. It's a logical assumption. To disappear in King's Landing, you have to be able to have secret places, but also be able to disguise yourself. As Varys often does. Like, that's one of the fun things in the books, is that Varys shows up and Tyrion is completely fooled by his mummer's disguises. So, similar thing here. Dornish Dame says, for someone who lacked the physical presence of his brother, being a confessor gives Larys power over the fate of others in a way he likely would not have had otherwise. Exactly. Yeah, it's his way of being the opposite of Harwin. You can just sort of see them diametrically opposed in that way. Everything that Harwin is bad at, Larys is good at, and vice versa. So that's kind of where we are towards the start of the Dance of the Dragons. So the biggest moment early on in Larys' story is, and highlighted explicitly in the text, is the idea that Larys may be a kinslayer. When Harwin and Lionel are burned to death at Harrenhal, the text points the finger to a lot of people, but one of them is Larys, as perhaps being behind the fire as a way to amass power for himself, becoming Lord of Harrenhal outright. Yeah, he's a better Gene Parmesan. That's right. I was actually watching clips about that last night. I love Lucille Bluth's response. She goes, ah, every time Gene shows up. It's amazing. I've discussed previously why I think the motivation presented here to be Lord of Harrenhal doesn't work well, because Larys doesn't take advantage of it. He doesn't return to Harrenhal. He doesn't use the power that comes with it. He basically ignores that he's Lord of Harrenhal. He basically allows Simon Strong, his uncle, to be effective Lord of the castle in his absence. Simon's really the Lord, not Larys. He doesn't do anything with it. So the idea that he would kill his father and brother to gain Harrenhal seems ridiculous. That doesn't seem like a strong motivation. But that doesn't mean there's not a motivation. Just that the one in the text may be incomplete. Bloodraven also gets the suspicion cast on him often, as I talked about in the previous stream, that he killed family members for his own gain. This is sort of a thing with Astro Whisperers, that they're so ruthless, anybody's game. The gain for Bloodraven killing a member of the Targaryen family, I think, is just as nebulous here as Larys. Like, Larys clearly felt that his lordship was not Harrenhal. As I said, it was King's Landing. He's the Lord of the Red Keep. He's the Lord of the Tunnels. He's the Lord of the underworld of King's Landing. He doesn't give a shit about Harrenhal. He knows it's a crappy place to own. This is also something that happens with Littlefinger, where he's named Lord of Harrenhal, but he doesn't do anything with it, because what would you do? Actually, Isabel Lamego just made that point. Exactly right. It is just a title. He doesn't take ownership of it. So I don't think that's a really good comp. Like, Littlefinger takes the Lord of Harrenhal, takes the lordship of Harrenhal, but that's not really what he wants. So, if Larys did have a hand in Harwin and Lionel's deaths, why would he even do it? Like, what's the point here? So there's a couple arguments you can make here. First off, as I said earlier, we don't know much of anything about the relationship between Larys and Lionel. But seeing as George has given us cause to link Larys to Tyrion, there's certainly a possibility that their relationship was, like Tywin and Tyrion, more adversarial. Tywin gave Tyrion jobs too. He was not allowed to essentially be idle after a certain point in his life. He was made Master of Coin. He was made Surrogate Hand of the King. And before that, Tywin even gave him the job as, to take care of the cisterns of Cashley Rock. And he did all this while despising his son with every fiber of his being. So the idea that Lionel giving Larys a career and a job does not mean that they liked each other. In particular, the lack of prestige and the horrific nature of the Confessors certainly speaks to the fact that Lionel may have known the truth about his son, that Larys was a very disturbed individual, and that he enjoyed inflicting pain on other. That would certainly lead a father to go like, wow, this is not a guy I'm a fan of. Or it could have been essentially embracing what he knew about Larys's nature and gave him a job to match. You see a similar thing with like Roose and Ramsay Bolton. Like Roose is just like, all right, well, you know, Ramsay's a psychopath who likes killing and skinning people, so I'm just going to accept that about him and lean into it. Yeah, Scott LaRock, Littlefinger is Lord Paramount of the Trident. That's the actual title he wants, not particularly Harrenhal. That's just the castle he's given, but the Lord Paramount is the actual cool thing, which Larys does not get. He just gets the Lordship of Harrenhal. Wait a second. I'm going to double check this. Littlefinger is Lord of the Trident, isn't he? I thought Walder Frey got just Riverrun. I didn't think he got Lordship. No, Peter Baelish is Lord Paramount of the Trident. Yeah, Baelish got it. Not Walder Frey. Walder Frey got Riverrun, but the castle is not the region. So that's certainly a point of contention between them. That's on the table. And for Harwin, you know, there's a very real possibility that the two brothers may have been close, but had to break down their relationship during Lionel's time as Hand of the King while they're both in King's Landing. But, like, over what? Well, maybe not a what, maybe a who. Princess Rhaenyra. It's mentioned in Fire and Blood that Lionel did try and get his son Harwin married to Rhaenyra before they end up doing it anyway. They get functionally married underneath Laenor's nose. Well, not really. He appears to have known. But anyway, he ends up being the functional husband to Rhaenyra. And you can assume that with the whole part of this, there were probably a lot of balls, social events, tourneys, where Lionel attempted to get Harwin as close to Rhaenyra as often as possible to try and enforce the marriage, get them to like each other, get them to know each other. You know, he probably saw Breakbones as the best way to try and secure the royal marriage for the Strongs to Princess Rhaenyra, which is very common within Hands of the Kings. However, the fact that he's doing this, there's no mention he's doing this for Larys. You favor Harwin, and Larys, who may already have kind of a complex about being a second son, may realize that he's not being pushed forward to try and marry the beautiful Princess Rhaenyra. You know, he's kind of a strange guy. He's quiet. He's a torturer. He's got his clubfoot. He lacks the size and good looks of Harwin. I mean, the picture I used for the from Fire and Blood, Larys does not look like an attractive dude. It's never said that he is. So who knows? Maybe Larys developed a crush on Rhaenyra. Maybe he sort of fell in love with her from afar and grew envious of those that she chose over him, similar to Littlefinger feels about Catelyn. You know, that would solidify a lot of the Littlefinger Larys comparisons if Catelyn and Rhaenyra played similar roles in these dangerous men's past. You know, as Master of Whispers and Lord Confessor, he would have spent a lot of time basically cataloging Rhaenyra's life and her secret life and her affairs. You can imagine that perhaps a young Larys got an unhealthy obsession with her. Like, this is a running theme in the Dance of the Dragons, that men who feel spurned by Rhaenyra end up on the opposite side of her. They end up on the other side of the war. And that's one of those things that's, for Larys, it's like, what the hell is he doing? Why is he on the side of the Greens when the rest of his family is ostensibly on the side of the Blacks? Well, if he hates Rhaenyra because in a similar way that he feels entitled to her, that he feels like whatever affections he has weren't being returned, that makes a lot of sense for where that resentment may have come from. I think it's interesting in kind of a meta sense what George is doing here, because there's a distinct lack of information here about Larys and Harwin's relationship. And it seems like he's kind of expecting you, the reader, to already be familiar with A Song of Ice and Fire and then use those as comparisons. So when he's referencing Tyrion, when he's referencing Littlefinger, referencing Varys, well, you're allowed to essentially think of, well, is there something between them? Like, when you think of Larys and Littlefinger, maybe you should think of the not just Larys, you should also think of Catelyn and Brandon Stark at the same time. Maybe that's the relationship between him and Harwin. You know, there's nothing on the page. That's George's point. He is not going to tell us what's going on with Larys Strong. So it's a fun theory crafting bonanza. That would certainly fit the spurned Littlefinger character. That would make sense if he had a problem with Harwin, and why he ends up on the side of the Greens. You know, yeah. You hate it's super petty. Yeah. So is Littlefinger. Littlefinger is incredibly petty, and so is Kristen Cole, and so is Alicent, and so are people on Rhaenyra's side too. It's a petty, stupid war over personal rivalries. So it wouldn't be that surprising if instead of having like some grand philosophical reason for supporting Aegon II, that for Larys, that it was something very personal, that there's a personal hurt for why he's going against the rest of his family. And if you think about it, let's say Larys does have a crush on Rhaenyra for whatever reason and feels spurned by her. Well, think about what happens when his older brother, not only that he learns as essentially the growing master of whispers, that it's his brother that is Rhaenyra's primary squeeze. And not only that, that they're having children, that he's become like her personal shield. You can see this perhaps enraging Larys with jealousy. You know, Fire and Blood offers the idea that that Larys sided with the Greens over the Blacks because of some kind of shame on how strong. But Larys is a torturer and master of whispers. I doubt he cares about the honor of his house, but a personal grievance could be a very good personal motivator and a big one for why he does what he does. Of course, you know, again, that is just speculation, but George invites us to speculate, so I am doing so. So if you want to make the argument that Larys is behind the fires that killed Harwin and Lionel, I mean, I personally think it was Daemon, but here it is. A personal grudge from Larys against his brother and his father, being treated as an outsider and a disappointment for not fitting into the historical prototype of the Strongs, maybe some kind of jealousy at Harwin's relationship with Rhaenyra, creating a desire for revenge. And perhaps even Daemon exploited that and used Larys's connections back home to get the murder done. You know, if you wanted to add some proof to this idea that Larys did it, well, the fact that Simon Strong is allowed to rule Harrenhal and that Larys basically ignores it is pretty strong evidence pointing this way, because you could see that as a payment for the murder of his kin. That Simon lit the fire at Larys's behest, and as a reward, he gets to essentially play at Lord of Harrenhal. That could work. And you know, there's another strange thing, that even after all this, and after the Greens come back to court and they take back control through Otto Hightower, Larys is allowed to keep his position following the deaths of Harwin and Lionel, even though they were on the side of the Blacks. For some reason, Otto Hightower felt that he could trust Larys to remain Master of Whispers instead of getting rid of him. So if you're looking for signals that perhaps the Greens were behind it or knew Larys was behind it, that could be one, that there was an acknowledgement that he was willing to kill his father and brother. And that makes him not on Rhaenyra's side, or maybe they even knew of his personal grievances, perhaps with Rhaenyra. That's one possibility. If you want to make that argument, I think that sounds pretty reasonable and lines up again with characters like Littlefinger and Tyrion's You know, the killing of Tywin and his problems with Jaime. You don't have to go far to draw those examples into Larys. They seem pretty close. Yeah, a lot of petty things going on in the Dance of the Dragons. That's right, Aaron. It's basically a big petty war. You know, court politics that blew up into a countrywide civil war. So we're going to skip forward here to the Green Council. Now, this is the moment where the Civil War, quote-unquote, began. Following the death of King Viserys, the Greens, with Otto Hightower, hold a meeting of the Small Council where they discuss how Rhaenyra should not be queen and they should crown Aegon II instead, her half-brother. As well as claims that as soon as Rhaenyra becomes queen, you know, she's probably going to kill all of them or strip them of their position. Notably, during this entire council, Larys is silent. He's just sitting there listening. This is typical of Larys. We know that he tends to listen and think before he acts. So it's hard to know exactly what's going through his brain as all this is happening. But knowing his later behavior, he's probably weighing his options. I talked about it at length, that maybe Larys bore a grudge against his father and brother, but it's certainly possible that he had a lot of affection for his sibling and his father and was upset at their deaths. On another, if it actually was Daemon who had Harwin and Lionel killed, if Larys found out it was Daemon and Corlys behind the murders, and that they are so promptly pro-Rhaenyra, that could explain also why Larys ended up on the side of the Greens. He wanted revenge at them for killing members of his family. It doesn't have to be resentment. You can also make an argument for how he ends up on the Greens, that he loves his family, and that he's upset that they were murdered. Although there is a teensy problem with that, and that is that Larys did nothing to protect his brother's sons in Jace, Luke, and Joffrey. You know, maybe there's some kind of lingering hatred of Rhaenyra that made him not want to do it, but it's certainly a flaw in the idea that he joined the Greens out of revenge against Daemon and Corlys. If that's true, then he should have done more for those three kids. The other things that are probably going through his mind is that, you know, if he joins the Greens and they lose, he'll be made the scapegoat. He is basically a non-existent lordship of Harrenhal. Again, this is shades of Littlefinger that makes him vulnerable. He has no loyal vassals. He has no knights. He has no soldiers that will back him or make it politically dangerous to just hang Larys out to dry if the rebellion doesn't go well. It's unclear if the rest of the Strongs would defend him. They don't seem to have much of a relationship. Again, it's very similar to Littlefinger and Tyrion and Varys, who know that their positions are extremely delicate, collapse at any time if they end up on the wrong side of a war. However, you can also assume that he's aware that if he tries to go against the Greens during this castle, he will likely be killed. Why? Because that just happened. Criston Cole killed Lyman Beesbury for speaking out against the plot. So Larys, even if he doesn't want to be on the side of the Greens, he's held hostage because he knows all of his power and all of his scheming does nothing when Criston Cole locks the door and holds a sword to him. So no matter what, he probably has to publicly side with Aegon II, no matter if he doesn't feel that's the right course, if he wants to survive, which he does. So Larys speaks up at the end and he proposes a blood pact. This is kind of crazy. Quote goes, Lord Larys Strong, Master of Whispers, then spoke for the first and only time. Let us be the first to swear, he said, lest there be traitors amongst us. Drawing his dagger, the Clubfoot drew it across his palm. A blood oath, he urged, to bind us all together, brothers unto death. So each of the conspirators slashed their palms and clasped hands with one another, swearing brotherhood. Queen Alicent alone amongst them was excused from the oath on account of her womanhood. Okay. Weird thing to exclude Alicent. I didn't know women could make blood oaths or blood pacts. Weird thing. So this certainly speaks to his devotion to the Greens, or at least his devotion against the blacks, which I'm guessing is actually the truth of it. Although you could definitely see this as performative, that Laris senses he's in danger and that he needs to try to appear to be their biggest supporter, and suggesting something as extreme as a blood pact certainly will assuage any fears that he's going to turn on them as soon as he gets out of the room. And it's extremely unlikely that Larys would personally consider this binding. His profession means that he often lies and deceives people to his own ends. So, yeah, probably not binding. I tend to fall on the side that Larys is joining the Greens not because he believes in the High Towers or Aegon or anything like that. He's doing it because he personally does not like Daemon, Corlys, or Rhaenyra, or some combination of the three, and that's what's going on here. There's not really hints of why he feels such loyalty to the Greens throughout the war. He's not offered lands, he's not offered marriages, but spite and anger are powerful motivators, even if it's not devotion. Oh, thank you guys for liking the stream so far. Got 150 people. It's bouncing up and down. Thank you guys for hanging out. Yeah, make sure you like the stream, subscribe, do all the things. It should be noted, though, that there is a sense of distrust of Laris, that even though he proposes this blood oath and takes actions that can only be seen as pro-green in the war to come, some of the Greens seem to think he's up to his own agenda and can't be trusted. This is borne out primarily with Aemon I. Later, when he descends upon Harrenhal, the Strongs plead with the prince. Hang on a second. Oh, this is actually a quote. Oh, I'm sorry, this is a quote. I didn't write this. So this is borne out primarily with Aemon I. When he descends on Harrenhal, the Strongs plead with the prince to leave them be, that they are loyal. We're like Larys, we're Aegon's men. First to suffer for it was Sir Simon Strong. Prince Aemon had no love for any of that ilk, and the haste with which the Castellan had yielded Harrenhal to Daemon Targaryen convinced him the old man was a traitor. Sir Simon protested his innocence, insisting that he was a true and loyal servant of the crown. His own great-nephew, Larys Strong, was Lord of Harrenhal and King Aegon's master of whisperers, he reminded the Prince Regent. These denials only inflamed Aemon's suspicions. The Clubfoot was a traitor as well, he decided. How else would Daemon and Rhaenyra have known when King's Landing was most vulnerable? Because you marched out the gates and rode your dragons, you dipshit. Someone on the small council had sent word to them. Larys the Clubfoot was Breakbone's brother, and thus an uncle to Rhaenyra's bastards. Am I streaming with Radio Westeros today? No, I am not. I forget what they're talking about. They're streaming at 5, though. So, to logically think this out, Aemon thinks that Larys may not be loyal because of a lingering love for his nephews by Rhaenyra, and that he may be working against the cause of the Greens. On the page, there's no reason to think this. Larys has been nothing but loyal. So this may hint to the idea that Aemon, among with others in the Greens, are aware that Larys and Harwin were perhaps not bitter enemies, that Larys perhaps did value his family and was upset at their murders. Otherwise, there's little reason here for this suspicion, and it also may indicate that Larys did not kill his father and brother, because if he did, there'd be no reason to doubt his loyalty to the king over his family. Like, that's the ultimate display of, I'm on Team Green. Look, I killed my brother and father. What else could you possibly do? But, Aemon's also a distrusting psychopath who murders people at a whim, so maybe Aemon isn't the best guess here, but there's certainly a lingering sense that the Greens are not sure what to make of Larys. Even if he's on their side, it may be that they have similar enemies rather than similar goals. It's on Tyrion. Oh, cool. Good timing. Larys and Tyrion, similar characters. Nailed it. Didn't mean to do that, but that's where we are. So I think the next thing to talk about here is Blood and Cheese. This is an important one. So the primary conflict that should show up in the show, House of the Dragon, or Hot D, is that Mysaria the White Worm and Larys, they are both the spymasters for the opposing sides, with Mysaria serving Daemon and Larys serving the Greens. And each work in the shadows and underbelly of King's Landing against each other. Very, very similar to Littlefinger and Varys. And this comes to a head with the story of Blood and Cheese. A brief description of the event, because it's horrifying. After the death of Prince Lucerys at the hands of Aemon I at Storm's End, supposedly Daemon sent orders to his spy mistress Mysaria in King's Landing to go get even. Mysaria hires two men, Blood the Butcher and Cheese the Rat Catcher. They sneak into the Red Keep using Cheese's knowledge of the secret passages and finds Queen Helena and her children, Jaehaerys and Maelor. They take them hostages, and the two men tell Helena she must choose which son lives and which dies. Helena chooses Maelor as the one to die because he was younger. Blood then turns around and cuts off Jaehaerys' head instead, right in front of her. Yeah, Blood and Cheese is incredibly fucked up. I am not looking forward to seeing this. It's going to be just awful. Maybe they'll do it off the screen, but I would doubt it. So suppose what happens next is that Blood gets caught. He's a giant of a man and a former gold cloak. He was apparently trying to escape King's Landing with the head of Jaehaerys to bring it to Daemon at Harrenhal to collect a bounty, I guess. He's given over to Larys, who then tortures him for 13 days to get information out of him. Blood, during this time, gives up that it was Mysaria who paid him and that paid him and Cheese to do it. Although Cheese, the rat catcher, is never found. Afterwards, Aegon II has all the rat catchers in the Red Keep and the neighboring area hanged, and replaces them all with cats instead to get rid of the rats, because I guess the rat catchers weren't that effective anyway. So why bring this up here? Why does this matter? Well, you'll forgive me for noticing that Cheese sounds a lot like Larys Strong. Certainly rat catchers would know the secret passages, but we are told that nobody knows them like Larys Strong. And actually, the quote here from Mushroom said that Cheese knew the Red Keep better than his own cock. Again, Larys is the living master of all the passages. He knows every single one, like Varys and Bloodraven. And he's skilled at deception and acting in disguise just like Varys, because we know later he disappears completely. So, could Larys have been involved with this somehow? Could he have been Cheese? I think it's possible. This goes back to his uncertain motivations. And you know, nothing in the Dance with the Dragons makes Rhaenyra and Daemon look worse than Blood and Cheese. This is the worst thing they do. Everybody holds this up as, how can you support the Blacks? They did Blood and Cheese. It's the worst thing that Daemon does in the war and his life, except for maybe the trying to seduce a very, very young Rhaenyra by a long shot. You know, it's pointlessly cruel and a stain on his honor and the side of Rhaenyra for the rest of the war. So maybe Larys was Cheese, and he carried out the murders to escalate the tensions and essentially make supporting them a moral problem by how far they went. And also to make sure that this little scuffle that's going on turns into a full-out war. There's no coming back in this after Blood and Cheese. This is the moment where the Dance of the Dragons could have maybe found a way back to peace. After this, there's no turning back. Everyone's all in. You know, chaos is a ladder, perhaps. Also, if you want to ascribe more Littlefinger things to this. But Larys did not literally have to be Cheese, though, for this to work. You know, he could have allowed it to happen for same reasons. You know, maybe he learned of the plot and was watching as Blood and Cheese made their way through the tunnels. You know, when I was reading this, I thought of Tyrion killing Tywin, because Varys very helpfully pointed out the ladder to get up to Tywin's room from the from the tunnels through Maegor's Holdfast in the Red Keep. So did Varys kill Tywin? In a way, because he pointed out very helpfully for Tyrion the way to go. And I bring this up because at this point in the story, Mysaria's domain in King's Landing is largely the underbelly and the poor parts of the city, like Flea Bottom and the Street of Silk. The area where Daemon essentially became king of, more or less. The Red Keep, though, is Larys's. It'll be difficult to sneak in the secret passages and escape without him knowing or finding you. And he would be well acquainted with all the rat catchers. That's his job. That this rat catcher is never caught by Larys suggests that there may have been no one to find, or that Larys didn't look that hard. He is a torturer, he is a murderer, he seemingly has no limits. Would he allow one of Helena's kids to be murdered in order to do this? Possibly. It certainly does help the Greens' cause. It doesn't help them in particular. It doesn't help Helena. It hurts a lot of them personally, but it helps them gain allies that they can hold up Blood and Cheese as this terrible thing that Daemon and Rhaenyra did. So that is just some crackpot, but I think it's a little strange that this murder happened through the passages that Larys is essentially the king of. Something to think about. Yeah, that's right, Isabel. Varys says, "Oh no, don't go, Tyrion. We really want to. The second door after 300 steps. You're doing amazing, sweetie." Yeah, Varys allows Tyrion to kill Tywin. It's possible that even if Larys was not literally cheese, if he was not in disguise, he certainly could have let the murders happen. And then there's the fact that blood is given over to Larys, and he's the one that delivers all the information back to the court. I mean, who knows if any of that's true, or how much of it, and also that people give up information under torture that's not true all the time. After 13 days of being tortured by Larys Strong, who knows what blood actually said or what truly happened. We see that Qyburn's torture ends up getting false confessions out of people all the time. Torture doesn't work that way. Yeah, so that's just a fun thing. That'd be cool if it shows up in House of the Dragon, like if Cheese is actually Larys in disguise, or he's watching from the shadows as it happens. He's a pretty shitty master of whispers to let that happen under his nose and then not be able to catch Cheese. He should know each rat catcher personally. So seems like something strange was afoot. So the next thing we're going to jump forward to is his disappearance and the riots. There's a lot of stuff we're going to skip over here, but one thing to keep in mind throughout the dance and House of the Dragon is that most of the information the Greens are acting on is largely coming from Larys. Troop movements, traitors, plots, rumors, stuff's all coming from him. So when they make big tactical errors or they get caught out or people essentially get screwed, it's natural to wonder if it's Larys who did them dirty personally. Not like the faction, the Greens, but individual members. There's no reason to think that there aren't grudges in between them. They're all people. So, did Criston get hung out to dry by Larys? Or Aemon, who distrusts Larys? Like, did he try and get the members of the faction he doesn't like killed? Or essentially allowed them to be killed or gave them bad information? That's definitely something Varys does, and Littlefinger, so you can imagine the same here. One thing is clear, though, is that King's Landing was about to fall at a certain point. The armies had marched out, the dragons went with them, and it looks like the city's about to be sacked. Why? Because Rhaenyra and Daemon are mounting up with their dragons and their troops, and they're about to take the city. During this, Larys basically saves the Green cause outright. This is one of those things that makes you question the other things, like, is he just trying to survive and he doesn't really care for the Greens? Well, this is one of those moments where you have to go like, well, he does care about the cause a little bit. Aegon II is largely immobile at this point. He's been burned from the dragon fight against Rhaenys and Meleys the Red Queen. Sunfire was injured, so was Aegon. Larys takes it upon himself to smuggle Aegon II out of the city, along with Princess Jaehaera and Prince Maelor. Larys splits them all up, and he sends Aegon disguised as a commoner in a fishing boat to hide on Dragonstone. Sunfire later joins him. Princess Jaehaera is sent to Storm's End for safekeeping. This is a thing that should come up in the show too. Larys and the Baratheons have a pretty good relationship for some reason. While he sends Maelor, for some reason, by road all the way across Westeros to try and reach the High Towers, going from King's Landing all the way to Old Town. That is a really long trip, especially for a kid that literally looks Targaryen with, like, I think he was with a member of a Kingsguard, so that one's suspicious. The Baratheons, where the journey from King's Landing down to Storm's End is relatively safe, but going all the way across the Reach, that's one that I am curious about that decision making. Why split them up like that? Maelor, and the outcome kind of points that way. Maelor's journey ends pretty poorly. He is murdered and torn to pieces by a mob at Bitterbridge. Jaehaera makes it safely to Storm's End, as does Aegon to Dragonstone. So if you wanted to see devotion in Larys to Aegon II's cause, this is it. Larys could have failed in his mission, or traded them to Rhaenyra to save his own life. You know, this speaks to that it's a personal thing against the Blacks and Rhaenyra's side, as this betrayal is so obvious that it must have occurred to him to essentially hand Aegon and his heirs over to Rhaenyra. He could have done that. Why wouldn't you sell out the king and his heirs? You know, you could end the war that night and be the hero of it. If you've ever seen Inglourious Bastards, it's like Hans Landa, when he essentially sells out the rest of the Nazis to the Americans. Like, everything Larys needs to switch sides and be rewarded for it is on the table. Betray Aegon, you get everything you want. But Larys doesn't do it. So I think that speaks to the idea that Larys doesn't want to do it, that he doesn't want Rhaenyra to win. That he has some stake in Aegon II's reign other than personal stuff. Yeah, Inglourious Bastards is a fun movie. Yeah, Hans Landa is also a good comp to Larys Strong. Seriously, end the war. You could do it, Larys. You don't. Why? Why go through all this effort? Well, again, I think it's that he's largely against the Blacks more than he's for the Greens. So he essentially saves the war here. Afterwards, no one knows where Larys went. He does not retreat to Harrenhal, nor is he caught and jailed with the rest of the Greens. Instead, Larys goes full Varys mode. He disappears into the underbelly of the Red Keep in King's Landing, effectively hiding from Mysaria, who then takes over as Mistress of Whispers of King's Landing. Now, given his skills and Varys' comparisons, it's highly likely that he never actually left the city at all after pushing Aegon off in a boat, and that he spends the rest of the war working against Rhaenyra from inside, much like Varys does to Cersei. Yeah, I don't understand. It makes sense to split up everybody. It doesn't make sense to send Maelor on that journey. That is a really dangerous one, and one that he's likely to get recognized during. Yeah, the daughter is given a safe one to his preferred allies in the Baratheons. He saves Aegon's life. Doesn't really care about Maelor, though. This is the part where I think the Winds of Winter really start showing up in Larys' story, because this is exactly what we see from Varys. You know, he creates whisper campaigns, and he inflames the general populace at every chance he gets to try and rebel against Rhaenyra's reign when she takes back King's Landing. Other than Blood and Cheese, which is pinned on Rhaenyra, but she was unlikely to have really anything to do with. It said in the text that Daemon gave the order when he was not with Rhaenyra. It seems like a thing he did on his own. The taxes become a big problem. When Sir Tywin Lannister, Master of Coin, fled the city, he did it with all the crown's remaining gold for safekeeping in Casterly Rock. So Rhaenyra takes the city and discovers that there's no money left in the treasury. They have no gold, so they have to raise taxes on everything to replenish the vaults and pay for the war. Curious here that did not occur to them to go to Essos and get any loans. Or they couldn't get any. So there's a lot we're really going to skip over here. The general message is that everything that happens in King's Landing after Rhaenyra takes over is largely Larys doing sabotage, much like Varys does to Cersei. He's paying off prominent members in the city. He's financing distrust. He's pretending to probably be people. He's leading mobs. He's encouraging whispers and trying to essentially create a social revolution against Rhaenyra. And this all comes to the head to the second fall of King's Landing. Rhaenyra's about to lose the city back to the Greens. Through his efforts, Larys has been effective in turning the people of King's Landing against Rhaenyra. You know, there's small riots and there's uprisings happening all over the place, and there's a growing popularity of a character named the Shepherd, a very strange man who I think is missing an arm, who claims to be a prophet and preaches against Rhaenyra and the dragons to ever-growing support. He ends up becoming the most powerful figure in King's Landing, kind of like the High Sparrow. I think that's another connection you're supposed to make. Think of the Shepherd, think of the High Sparrow. Also, there's the defection of Hugh the Hammer and Ulf the White, the two dragon seeds that were on Rhaenyra's side. This is mentioned in the text that this was Larys who did this again, that he promised them lands and riches if they switched sides, which they did. This led to Rhaenyra's escalating paranoia getting the best of her, and she ends up trying to arrest Adam Velaryon for being a bastard, I guess. Corlys tips off Adam, and Adam escapes. Rhaenyra imprisons Corlys in revenge and effectively cuts out the last leg she has, as the Velaryons are her biggest allies and supporters at this point. They are the ones funding the war on her side. Larys' machinations at work. He has effectively turned the power structure of the Blacks against each other. The major, though, inciting event here, again, has to do with Queen Helaena. She supposedly commits suicide right before it looks like the Greens are about to take back the city. She had been taken hostage during all this time, and there's hints from Mushrooms that there was a lot of ideas on how they should kill or torture her. Mushroom says that they essentially used her and Alicent Hightower, her mother, as sex slaves in the Street of Silk. But the other POVs essentially say no, that never happened. Don't really know which way to go on that one. But essentially what happens is Helaena jumps from her chambers and impales on the spikes in Maegor's dry moat around the castle. There's a lot of explanations for why she committed suicide. Again, the one first is Mushroom's thing, that she was being used for sexual slavery, and that's why she took her own life. Munkin and Eustace say no, never happened. They suggest that she did it because Mysaria told Helaena how Maelor died, how he was ripped to shreds in Bitterbridge. But a rumor outside of these explanations makes it out in the city, and the rumor mongering is blamed on Larys Strong by Mushroom, that this was actually an execution, and it was a cruel one Rhaenyra pulled off. Now, this doesn't actually seem to be true at all, because why would Rhaenyra do that now after all this time? She doesn't kill any of the other hostages when she flees the city. Like, they're all recovered by the Greens, basically unharmed, out of the dungeons. So why kill Helaena? It doesn't make any sense. Again, this has to be Larys' doing, that he created the rumor, but I go further. If you think that he may have done blood and cheese, maybe he kills Helaena here. In like completing the blood and cheese thing, that because her death specifically inspired the riots and the rumors were spread that it was Rhaenyra's doing. It certainly benefits Larys and the Greens in the fact that it effectively ends her control over King's Landing in a particularly brutal way that is used as propaganda as the city basically burns down. I don't put anything above Larys. I think that he could have been behind Blood and Cheese, and he definitely could have been behind Helena's murder here, because he uses it so expertly. He could have just been taking advantage of it and just created a rumor out of nowhere. But it doesn't make sense why Rhaenyra would do it, and I don't know. I think the idea that Helena just had enough, basically. But that was the other thing, is that it looked like the Greens were going to come save them. So she should have had hope at that point that she was going to survive. Oh, good call, Dornish Dame. Helena's death also opens up the possibility of Aegon II remarrying, producing more sons. Well, he's not going to be producing more sons. They say that in Fire and Blood, that the dragon's flame roasted certain parts of him. But she's not really... Helena, if you're thinking about her from like a tactical perspective, isn't going to do anything more in the war. Aegon's not going to be able to get her pregnant again. And she's incredibly popular. Like, Helena was beloved by the people of King's Landing. I don't think it's above Larys to use her again as a way to turn the general populace against Rhaenyra and Daemon. Although I have no problem believing it was suicide, especially after the death of Maelor. And there's a story about that she saw a couple guys being hanged, but then that's also disputed in the text that she wasn't there and she couldn't have seen it. So I don't really know. The one thing so yeah, at this point, this again speaks to Larys's plan. The regular people are already at a boiling point, and it builds to a crescendo with the storming of the Dragon Pit. Again, Larys is behind this, and he's probably behind the Shepherd, because amplifying his messages and supporting him as the people of King's Landing stage a full-out riot. They storm the Dragon Pit and kill most of the dragons, including Rhaenyra's Syrax. Her youngest son by Harwin, Joffrey, also dies to the mob. He's trying to save the dragons when Rhaenyra refuses. Her counselors end up convincing Rhaenyra to give up the city and escape before they storm the gates. The Greens take advantage. Again, Larys's plan is all working here. These riots are so expertly timed and planned out, and the target of it is in particular interesting. Destroying the Dragon Pit really, really helps the Greens because they are at a dragon disadvantage. So the idea that the Shepherd keeps pointing to the dragons and then they end up storming the Dragon Pit seems more tactical than accidental. One thing to keep in mind here is this could be highly illustrative of what happens to Cersei in the Winds of Winter. The parallels here between Rhaenyra and Cersei, Larys and Varys, Tommen and Joffrey, the fall of the city are all very obvious, as well as maybe what happens next. That, for instance, that Cersei may lose the city and end up fleeing, Tommen dying in the process because of Varys's machinations to help young Griff. Those two seem pretty easy to link together. Instead of the fall of the Dragon Pit, it may be... the Dragon Pit's not really the same thing. There may be another mob attack somewhere led by the High Sparrow, who's obviously very similar to the Shepherd. So, again, these just line up really well. Actually, somebody made this point in No on the announcement post for this on the channel. They said, I think George scrapped the draft of the Winds of Winter and turned into Fire and Blood to not throw everything away. Explain why Winds of Winter isn't out and why Fire and Blood is, and why it was followed by an apparent serious progress. George said he wouldn't change the story due to spoiling it, but yeah, it seems very likely that Fire and Blood is in part a rough draft for the Winds of Winter, especially these parts, especially the Dance of the Dragons part. It seems like this is probably one of the parts of the story he's struggling with the most. And maybe one of the parts of the show he liked the least. So he wrote like his own version here. Are you going to see Tommen suffer the fate of Maelor? Maybe Maelor, but maybe Joffrey too. Both of them are basically torn to shreds by a mob. I wouldn't put it past Gurm to do it to him. Yeah, the attack on the Dragon Pit is quite sad to go back and read. Where was I? Oh yes, then we get the Moon of the Three Kings. For the next month, the city descends into anarchy with 3 kings essentially showing up to claim to be the new rulers of King's Landing. You have Trystane Truefire, backed by Sir Perkin the Flea, claiming to be Viserys the First's son. Wait, no, Viserys. Yeah, that's Viserys the First. Then Gaiman Palehair, who claims to be Aegon II's son, and the Shepherd, who's trying to essentially become a religious leader. What's important here for Larys in particular, we're not doing a whole history of the Dance of the Dragons, is that the Shepherd, after the storming of the Dragon Pit and the fall of King's Landing and Rhaenyra getting out, the Shepherd loses his support almost immediately. His power basically vanishes. Why does that happen? They were successful. They stormed the Dragon Pit. They killed a lot of dragons. So shouldn't that increase his support? No. I think this is indicative that the reason for the Shepherd's success was Larys, because he then shifts his support to Trystane Truefire and Perkin the Flea. Perkin the Flea, he may, again, for Win's a Winner, this may be young Griff and John Connington here. Perkin goes around knighting anyone who joined their cause and stages a relatively organized takeover of the Red Keep and the surrounding areas, which again is suggestive of John Connington, who they may have a limited success taking over King's Landing and installing a potentially fake Targaryen as king. We learn later that the reason for this is Larys, in essence. Varys is supporting young Griff and John Connington. The parallel seems, again, right on the money. He had previously leveraged the Shepherd to create chaos to oust Rhaenyra, aka Cersei. Once that was over, he moved on and organized Trystane's regency through his puppet Perkin as a placeholder to protect his holdings in the Red Keep until the Greens returned, essentially. We know that because of this line in the books. King Aegon's Master of Whispers, Larys Strong the Clubfoot, fared much better. The Lord of Harrenhal emerged intact from wherever he'd been hiding. Like a man risen from the grave, he came striding through the halls of the Red Keep as if he had never left them. Be greeted warmly by Sir Perkin the Flea and take a place of honor at the side of his new king. Larys was behind all of this. He was behind the scenes, he was organizing the riots, he was organizing who would win the riots, and then pick Trystane through Perkin in order to have a regent on the Iron Throne. I would expect to see this almost word for word happen in the Winds of Winter. That Connington and young Griff will oust Cersei after riots by the faithful, with Varys essentially outing himself at the end, like, haha, I did this. I also think the idea of when you compare Perkin to John Connington and Trystane Truefire to young Griff, I mean, it seems on the nose. But yeah, Larys is behind all of it. He has essentially taken back the city for the Greens. He's essentially just waiting for Aegon II to return, or for Jaehaera to resurface from the Baratheon so that they can continue. Essentially, Larys has eliminated all of his enemies. There's nobody left to oppose him. He's in sole control now. There are other members of the court still there. Otto Hightower is dead at this point, but Alicent Hightower is greatly reduced in her abilities. Most of the Greens counselors have died between Criston Cole and Aemon One-Eye, so it's basically just Larys. Larys wins. He wins the Game of Thrones. Until the Hour of the Wolf. The Hour of the Wolf is not great for Larys. Essentially what this is in the background of all of this, there has been Lord Cregan Stark. Him and his northern soldiers have essentially, and his fresh soldiers have linked up with the Riverlanders who have been resisting, and created essentially the only army left in Westeros, other than the Baratheons, and they are marching on King's Landing. This is bad news for Larys and Trystane Truefire, and basically anyone left on the green side, because they don't have any defense anymore. It looks like the Starks are going to show up and sack King's Landing, kill everyone on the green side, and reinstall probably Aegon III, Aegon, son of Rhaenyra, who's still alive and being held hostage. As Lord Cregan fought on the side of Rhaenyra. Even after her death, he has not forgotten his oath. He's continuing to go after and punish the Greens. Yeah. War horns and guitar solos going off as Cregan shows up to kill everybody. So what ends up happening, Larys sees this all happening and goes, oh shit, we're screwed. What are we going to do? Well, it turns out the Baratheons are essentially racing Cregan to King's Landing. And they have largely stayed out of the war, and their army is still intact. So essentially, Larys then manipulates Perkin the Flea, and Trystane Truefire, and saying, like, guys, don't worry about this Cregan Stark thing. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get the Baratheons on our side. We're going to get Jaehaera back. Everything's going to be great. They'll defend us. What happens? Larys goes to Lord Baratheon and sells out Trystane. He sells out Perkin the Flea, the rest of the Greens, and essentially makes a deal for himself to give control of King's Landing over to the Baratheons, to give up everyone who's still, all the pretenders on the throne, everyone loyal to Trystane, and out of it, Larys finally gets something for himself. He organizes a marriage between himself and one of the, I think the youngest daughter, or one of the younger daughters of Lord Baratheon. So Larys at this point finally is making his move. Everyone else is out of the way. It's Larys time. You might suggest this could be a little bit like Littlefinger and Sansa at some point. Perhaps. Well, sort of. There's a at a certain point, Aegon II does return. After this, after they sell them out, Aegon's reinstated, and they essentially try to get everything back together. They're trying to put everything back together. The Winter Wolves are on their way. But the coalition isn't going that great, because, as it turns out, they all hate each other, in particular Corlys Velaryon. Corlys is, despite being in the dungeons for a long time, is still a powerful man, and they need to find a way to resist Cregan essentially sacking the city. So this is essentially the suggestion from Larys Strong on how they use the Velaryons to essentially as a shield against Cregan. It said, Larys says, "He will die soon enough in any case," replied Lord Larys Strong. "Let us make peace with him now and make what use of him we can. Once all is safely settled, if we have no further need of House Velaryon, we can always lend the stranger a hand." And he goes on to say, "Another thing, kill the old snake and we lose the young one," Clubfoot said. "And all those fine, swift ships of theirs as well. Instead," he said, "they must move at once to make amends with Lord Corlys, so as to keep House Velaryon on their side. Give him a betrothal, your grace," he urged the king. "A betrothal is not a wedding. Name young Aegon your heir. A prince is not a king. Look back at history and count how many heirs never lived to sit the throne. Deal with Driftmark in due course, when your foes are vanquished and your tide is at the full. That day has not come. We must bide our time and speak to him gently. Overcompromise. Make deals. Kill them before they can collect." He uses Corlys essentially as not only as a shield, but also a way to try to convince Cregan of his loyalty. Super chat here from Brian Molesky, $5. Thank you so much. What if Gurren went wild and made Jon Snow a time traveler? Insane. Would love your take. Bran's the time traveler. I don't think he's going crazy. That one's already on the table. Bran and Bloodraven are essentially time travelers. but thanks for the super chat. So essentially what happens here is that Larys is trying to organize a way to not only resist Cregan, but a way to coalesce power around the dying Aegon II, basically. But it's for a particular reason. And that is that Larys recognizes that there's no way they're going to survive the Riverlands and the Starks. It's out of the question. They're going to lose this even with Corlys's help. So he counsels them together to make common cause with Corlys, saying we'll betray Corlys, but at the same time he's saying the same thing to Corlys. He's saying join me and we'll betray them. He's trying to essentially put everyone against each other. And the actual plan here is to murder Aegon II. That Larys Strong uses Corlys to help him poison and kill Aegon II, the dying king at this point, to curry favor with Cregan Stark and use Corlys as the way to make sure that he survives the upcoming sack of the city. That he can essentially say, look, I mean, I was always on your side. You can tell. I killed Aegon II. I'm on the black side. Look, Corlys is vouching for me. Screw all the rest of the Greens. We're doing great. That's essentially his plan. So Aegon II is poisoned. He is killed. And essentially nothing happens. But Larys doesn't stop there. He doesn't stop there at trying to make sure Cregan won't kill him. When Cregan arrives with the Riverlanders and the Northern forces, Larys opens the gates, and he organizes among the small folk, similar to how he did for the Shepherd, to essentially throw a parade for the Northerners, to essentially say like, hey, don't sack us, we're glad you're here, look, we're all on your side, you're the conquering hero, screw the Greens, everything's great. And it works in a sense that the Northerners do not then go on and essentially sack the city. As that would probably lead to total chaos and Larys' death. It is essentially they're surrendering. Larys is surrendering the city, while the rest of the Greens are going like, oh shit, we just got sold out. Cregan has none of it, and then we get the Hour of the Wolf here. He rounds up everyone involved with the war, and in particular the murder of Aegon II, and starts holding trials over the traitors. As predicted earlier, like I said, everyone does turn on Larys, and he's hung out to dry. None of his allies stick by him. In particular, Perkin the Flea reveals that everything from the riots to the murder of Aegon was Larys, and he was basically behind everything that happened in the city after the fall to Rhaenyra. All the other counselors say the same thing. They all furiously point to Larys as the scapegoat for literally everything. Yes, blow your air horns for the Hour of the Wolf. So I'm going to point out here that although this is like a Varys thing, this feels extremely similar to Tyrion's trial, even down to the point that Larys basically doesn't defend himself against it. Cregan sends a whole lot. He sentenced basically everyone to death, but they all go, Can we go to the wall, Lord Stark? We'll join the Night's Watch. Can we do that? And he says, yeah, thumbs up. Everybody go to the wall that I don't kill. Only 2 guys actually get killed, and it's Larys and I think it's a member of the Kingsguard that ends up dying. I think it's the guy that was guarding Aegon who allowed him to be poisoned. Those are the 2 that actually get beheaded by Cregan. So here's the quote on how Larys Strong dies. And it says, next and last to die was Lord Larys Strong. When he asked if he wished to take the black, he said, no, my lord, I'll be going to a warmer hell if it please you, but I do have one request. When I am dead, hack off my clubfoot with that great sword of yours. I have dragged it with me all through life. Let me be free of it in death at least. This boon Lord Stark granted him. Thus perished the last Strong, and a proud and ancient house came to its end. Lord Larys' remains were given over to the Silent Sisters. Years later, his bones would find their final resting place at Harrenhal, save for his clubfoot. Lord Stark decreed that it should be buried separately in a pauper's field, but before that could be done, it disappeared. Mushroom tells us that it was stolen and sold to some sorcerer who used it in casting of his spells. The self-same tale is told of the torn foot off Prince Joffrey's leg in Flea Bottom, which makes the veracity of both suspect unless we are meant to believe that all feet are possessed of malign powers. The heads of Lord Larys Strong and Sir Giles Belgrave were mounted on either side of the Red Keep's gates. So there's definitely a lot of oddness to the end of Larys's life, where it seems like he may have grown to regret his saving of Aegon II at the fall of King's Landing, because here he completely changes his mind. When the Starks are bearing down on him, when he knows his time is up, when he knows the Greens will sell him out, he instead helps kill Aegon. He tries to use Corlys as a shield. He organizes a parade and then gets screwed by the rest of the Greens anyway. And one thing in particular that dooms him is that he underestimates Lord Cregan's essentially devotion to honor and justice. That he doesn't think logically that he should get, that Cregan will see what he did as murder, that he'll see it as a favor, much in the same way when Tywin laid the bodies of Rhaenys and Aegon at the feet of Robert. That's what Larys is trying to do here, that he's trying to show loyalty, that he's trying to prove that, hey, you know, I'm on your side. I made mistakes, but look what I did for you. I did you this big favor. Cregan doesn't see it that way. It's the same way that Ned sees Jaime, that he doesn't see Jaime killing the Mad King as a service. He sees it as a betrayal. That he views it as a failing of Larys Strong, that he can't be trusted and that he committed murder, even though it's murder against his enemy. Yeah, that's true, Aaron. Another example of how the North and South really don't get each other. And that's something that should come up in The Winds of Winter. This is something very much that should come up in Littlefinger's story, and there should be something that comes up in Varys' story. That they have trouble dealing with these pesky Northerners and their sense of justice that is much more based around... well, Southern justice tends to be politically motivated, but Northern justice tends to be much more crime, like the actual crime committed, rather than how it affects you in particular. That it's the Lord's duty to, even if it's regicide of your enemy, that apparently it's a thing you have to honor. Yeah, that's true. How Ned is pissed as hell that Robert's still trying to murder Daenerys. Yeah. That it helps him. It helps his side. It would help Robert if Viserys and Daenerys were dead, but Ned can't stomach it, and Cregan can't stomach the regicide here. And that, yeah, that should... I would really expect that to come up in Varys and Littlefinger's stories. If you try and chart Larys Strong's and everything that happens in King's Landing after the riots onto Varys, I mean, that is not a good outcome for Varys, and probably not one that he's expecting. Like, if Jon Snow shows up in Cregan's shoes, what would he do if Varys hands him over like Cersei or Tom and Dead or something like that in order to prove his loyalty? Well, Jon's probably not going to see that well. Or Bran, either one of them. Northern justice is a very different idea. And not one that Larys is equipped to deal with. It's also interesting that one thing that I really found interesting about this is the cutting off of his foot. That Larys, in his final moments, he says that the clubfoot he dragged behind him in life, and he found it a burden, that he wants to be separated from, that he felt it was a curse on him. And if you wanted to, I think that quote in particular can go back and inform his relationship to perhaps the rest of the Strongs, to Harwin, to Lionel. If it really was something that he was teased about, maybe something he was bullied about. It was something that set him apart from the rest of his family, that made him unable to fit in. The fact that he had this deformity. Not really a big deal, but within their family it very well could have. So if you're looking for something, that would be something to zero in on. His like one personal thing he said is that his clubfoot ruined his life. Well, it can't have ruined his life if there wasn't somebody holding against him. And again, the rest of the Strongs seem like the obvious case for who did it. Yeah, that's right, Voltaire. John the White Wolf marching on King's Landing and holding another hour of the wolf. That would be pretty interesting. Although there is a question, at least in my mind, if this is meant as, in particular, a draft of The Wind's a Winner, or if this is a response to seasons 7 and 8 of Game of Thrones. Because it's going to be pretty anticlimactic if The Wind's a Winner comes out and it's just all of this reskinned, like almost the exact actions with the characters subbed in. There should be more to it. But obviously we'll be seeing this in person. We'll be seeing this on the ground. Maybe this is like a rough outline of where he's going. Super chat. Again from Brian Molesky, $5. Thank you so much. Thoughts on the concept in the books. Benjen replaced Eddard at the execution and Eddard lives. Never heard that one. Nope. Benjen's probably dead if he's not cold hands. Eddard is also super dead. Not coming back, although maybe Robb Stark will. I hope so. I find all this really intriguing about Larys, that he's kind of like a distillation of all these different characters in ways that you wouldn't really think. Like, I think the idea that Tyrion and Varys get along, it's kind of like Larys is the bridge between them. You can see where they have things in common, and how George loves writing these characters, but he also likes seeing them get their comeuppance. That, there's a sword waiting for Varys' head at the end. Littlefinger's too, that all of this is really going to get them nowhere in the end. And it makes him a fascinating character, and what I'm really looking forward to in House of the Dragon. One thing we don't have in Fire and Blood when we're looking at Larys is really a look at him as a person. What is he like on an individual level? Because he's so quiet and he rarely speaks. You only get to see his actions. But I think it's going to be fascinating to see him doing things. He's basically going to be present throughout the entire show. Especially if you get more detail on him. Like, one of the better things in the adaptation that doesn't show up in the books is Littlefinger and Varys' sparring match, basically, in front of the throne. Something like that for Larys Strong is something I would really, really like to see. And I think he also makes the point of, if you're thinking about Larys as a character, is that he is unambiguously a villain. He is a terrible person. He's a murderer. He's a torturer. He's like Qyburn plus Bloodraven plus Littlefinger and Varys all rolled into one horrible character, and yet he's still fascinating. He still pushes the story forward. Personally, I would also like it if he had hand in more things than were shown, and I would love to know the truth of this guy. There's parts of it, other members of his family that, Harwin is not particularly a fascinating character. He's probably going to die pretty early on, and any characterization we get of him will be through his sons. We don't know a lot about Lionel. It's Larys that George put so much effort into creating this person. So I'm personally really looking forward to that in House of the Dragon. Yeah, I agree, Dornish Dame, that if Winds of Winter was just this section of Fire and Blood with different names, we'd have it already. Exactly. So there should be differences, but the parallels are so strong that it's hard not to think about how some of this is foreshadowing for those characters, even if it doesn't go down exactly the same. So, actually, I've been ignoring questions pretty much this whole time because I wrote a really, really long outline. This was 16 pages long. So, throw your questions in the chat. Anything I overlooked, anything I missed, you guys can @ me, bro. Benjen is Craster's black sausage. Yeah, probably. I'm gonna scroll up. I probably missed some stuff. Sorry for ignoring the chat. I had a lot to get through, so I was talking kind of fast. I also skipped over quite a lot. But a lot of it is kind of just the same. It's Larys doing things behind the scenes, and the way you can tell he's doing it is by who benefits when it happens. Yeah, it's kind of an outline. It's I did write most of it. Oh, hey, Daisy. Oh, yeah, 2 hours late. That's okay. You can watch the replay. What out the story do you believe that no one else does? Like tinfoil theories that I think that nobody else believes. I don't know, most of the stuff on my channel, I think. I'm not sure how many people I convinced of the idea that Robb Stark will be coming back. I am personally, after writing and talking about this, I am very curious about Larys Strong's role in Blood and Cheese. That it seems like either he was involved or he let it happen is certainly something interesting. I'm definitely a believer in Amanda's Duncan the Strong idea and all the consequences of that. I think that's a brilliant one. But that's actually not that popular. Most people have no problem saying Dunk and Brienne are related, but making Duncan a Strong is one that does not have that high of belief in the fandom, I will say. That totally makes sense. Lopez Land. Do you think Joffrey being killed by Queen Rhaenyra's dragon was symbolism for her to get him killed? I butchered names. Don't worry, I butcher names all the time. I am the worst at names. Yeah, that could be definitely true, that if you're thinking of Rhaenyra as Cersei and Joffrey as Tommen, as confusing as that sounds, then the idea that Cersei somehow ends up getting Tommen killed for her own selfishness is definitely something you could see happen. They did it in the show with the whole Marjorie subplot thing. That's not going to happen. That, Tommen's too young for any of that to happen in the books, but the idea that Cersei's actions end up rebounding on Tommen is definitely, I could definitely see. What other crazy... well, I have other tinfoils, but I can't really say them because they're going to be future videos. Ones I have published. One that I believe in that not many people do. I think that Ghost is also a skin changer / green seer. That his relationship with Jon is more two-way than one-way. It's much more an equal relationship. And it also seems like Ghost is as smart as Jon. Maybe smarter. He also seems to understand English sentences or common sentences. He also can somehow connect and reach this. I think he can reach the Green Realm, because there's that dream where Jon is warging Ghost, and then Ghost is walking around this dream world, and then they find Bran. Well, that's through Ghost. That makes it seem like he's the one doing it, not Jon. That's another crazy tinfoil I believe in. But I think it's interesting that I think people have more sympathy for Rhaenyra than they do for Cersei. And how that ends up manifesting, I'm kind of interested. Like, is George going to introduce more sympathy for Cersei as her story goes on? That could be interesting. Can't bring myself to think Robb Stark could come back. His head is gonna be nothing but a skeleton by now. Oh, the whites are skeletons. I don't understand that one. I don't understand where people were like, he's beheaded and he's a skeleton. This isn't like World of Warcraft rules. Like, George clearly has skeletal remains and characters without heads. They're undead. They're undead. It doesn't really. That one got said so much in response to my Rob Stark one, and I just kept throwing my eyes. I'm like, where are these rules coming from? Why did... where in the story does it say this can't happen? In fact, it's pretty much the opposite. Like the skeletal hand that Alistair Thorne tries to bring to King's Landing, and it just keeps moving. Like, what's the difference between that and if Rob Stark came back? I don't know. Another question from Lopez Land. Do you think there are any hidden dragon eggs underneath the Red Keep? That is one that has been been suggested for quite a while. We know I think there's some stone ones on Dragonstone. I think, is that in a Stannis chapter or something? I think there are still some left there, but they've turned to stone. But there's definitely the idea that there's a lot of secrets down beneath the Red Keep that Varys still has to essentially uncover. I mean, we've seen so little of it. There's no telling all those passages that Maegor put in and the way that people are going to sort of pop out of everywhere. It definitely suggests the idea that there are probably like secret vaults deep underground. I wouldn't be surprised to see there are dragon eggs, although that would be a little confusing. If they're down there, wouldn't Varys have given them to Viserys and Dany? Although maybe that's where they got them from. I was under the impression though that the 3 eggs that Illyrio has came from Alyssa Farman, but it's definitely a suggestion. If whites could be killed by beheading, it would be easier. Yeah, it would be. Like, they try to kill whites in a bunch of different ways, and it's really hard to do it because they're actually skeletons. Like a lot of them, they basically have very little flesh left on their bones. They're zombies, so I think it's what is it? The Walking Dead rules, where if you shoot them in the brain, then they die. But that's not how George's Zombies works. I don't think they don't rely on brains. I think they're like puppeted. So, yeah, it's definitely a maze under the Red Keep. I would like to see more of it. Maybe Connington will go down there with Varys. That'd be kind of cool. Let's see here. Dornish Dame says, "Do you have any? Have you heard of any interesting fan cast for Larys on House of the Dragon?" I'm not good at fan casts. Like, actually, somebody pointed out that on Twitter when I posted the Larys Strong image, that they said that the colorized Larys looks a lot like Bronn. Looks like what's his name? Bronn. I'm so bad. Jerome Flynn. And it's not wrong. Jerome Flynn would probably make a pretty good Larys Strong, if you're at least going by the images and Fire and Blood. I haven't heard of any casting of him. We also haven't heard of any casting for Harwin. Lionel, maybe. A lot of the kids seem to have been cast, though, or at least they're showing up in the set photos. I am curious when they're going to start releasing more information about the Strongs. I know they're doing the Game of Thrones convention in February in Vegas. I think that's when it is. I imagine they'll be revealing a lot of stuff there. I mean, I'm not going because COVID, like going to a convention now seems not a good idea if you don't want to possibly catch the Delta variant or COVID-19. But hopefully they do like online stuff we can watch. I would love to see who they're going to cast for Larys. They're probably going to put a lot of effort into that casting because he's going to be around for a long time in the show. I think that's about it. If you guys don't have any last questions, throw in there. I know I started a little bit late, and then we'll be getting out of here. I got stuff to do, like the Radio Westeros going live at 5, and then I got to do my Dying of the Light Chapter 6 stuff. Gotta get that done for the 15th, or close to. Yeah, Illyrio and Varys' whole plans are very silly. George makes fun of it too. In A Dance with Dragons, he has the Golden Company make fun of Illyrio, by proxy making fun of him, about how his plan's always changing. Because, yeah, if you try and track Illyrio and Varys' plans from a Game of Thrones to A Dance with Dragons, they really don't make a lot of sense. I think those are one of the places where George's gardening style essentially does the worst, because it is almost incomprehensible how much their plans change. And eventually George just has to go like, well, things keep going wrong, so that's why they changed. Not that they were silly to begin with. Let's see here. I'm not going to a con anytime soon. I have to get my booster soon. I actually got my my vaccine a while ago, because I work for a local hospital system, and they made us get it very, very early on. It was available to us very early on to make sure that we're not passing it to patients or anything. I'm not like a doctor or anything like that, but I do have to be around patients some. Hopefully I'll be getting my boosters. Voltaire the Goldflame. Joe, do you think that Larys and Aemon the Dragon Knight are sort of inverse parallel to Cersei? Thoughts of Jaime and Cersei being Targ bastards, but Tyrion's a trueborn. Whoa, those are some big topics. Aemon the Dragon Knight and Larys. I think, yeah, you're definitely supposed to think of parallels between them and Cersei and Jaime, but also yeah, here with Rhaenyra and Daemon, but also then Rhaenyra with Harwin and Rhaenyra and Laenor. George really loves the idea of these royal couples hooking up with people they're not supposed to. There's like bad behavior among them. I don't know if I believe the Daenerys Aemon stuff, if they actually went to the Bone Zone, or if it was just a thing that Aemon was always very sad about it. Because that requires you to believe that Aegon the Unworthy was correct, and he's generally framed as wrong and a giant prick about everything. So I don't know about that one. Thoughts on Jaime and Cersei being Targ bastards, but Tyrion is trueborn? My thoughts on Tyrion Targaryen and then Jaime and Cersei Targaryen are that on both cases, I tend to think that they're both actually just Tywin and Joanna's, but I think this is one of those places where George left himself lots of room to make either of those true if he felt like it. There's enough foreshadowing and there's enough groundwork done for both of those pairs that if by the end he decides one way or the other, like he could just flip it. He could just be like, well, at first I thought Tyrion was the Targaryen, but I'm going to make him Tywin's actual son, and now I'm going to use the Jaime and Cersei foreshadowing, or use both or neither. I think that's kind of the thing with his gardening style, is that it's rather than an exact plan into the future, he's really good at improvising. He's really good at using previous writing for new purposes. So I think that's a very fertile area for him. He can do either or both or none, and it would all work because of the way he wrote it. That's right, Emma. The one thing Aegon IV was actually right about, Larys and Aemon. Wouldn't that be a thing? Aeon the Fourth. Amazingly, my brain knew what you were saying, even though you mistyped it horribly. Like, it just read Aegon. I'm like, yeah, that's what she means. Another one from Brian Molesky. Thank you, Brian. $10. What would be preferred ending? Who sits where? Who is the king and queen? Well, Bran's gonna be king in the end. My preferred ending is the one that George writes. I don't really have a particular one I want to see, because it's his imagination that I like reading and I like exploring. He has such a brilliant mind for it, and a way with words, and a way of making these things all work and feel, tragic and bittersweet, also somehow satisfying, even while he's gut punching you, that whatever his ending is, whatever details it has, that's what I want to read. I don't think I could come up with a better one than he can. It's kind of a cop-out, I guess, but like, I don't read his work to make up my own, basically. I want to see his ideas. I guess that's my way of answering that. It would be like George to have Aegon IV be right about one thing. Blackfire Rebellion, get a war between two bastards all along. Yeah, he does like doing that stuff. I think that's probably about it. Thank you guys for hanging out this Saturday with me, talking all about Larys Strong. I hope you guys are excited as I am to see him in House of the Dragon. And whatever foreshadowing his character holds for the Winds of Winter. Make sure you do all the things, if you enjoyed the content, subscribe, like, share, do all the things. If you want to support me, there's Super Chat. Actually, another one just came in as I was saying that from Brian Molesky. And support me on Patreon as well at patreon.com/JoeMagician. Look for around the 15th chapter 6 of the Diagonal Light read through to come out. Next week I'm off. I won't I have to work, so no stream. It'll be in 2 weeks. And actually, let's do something for the comments. What's a good question about Larys for the comments? All right, here we go. Do you think that Larys Strong had a hand in, or actually outright did, murder Harwin and Lionel? Put that in the comments of this video. I'm kind of curious what people think. I mean, it's such an open question, and it's such a good question, too. That's kind of what Fire and Blood is. It's a series of questions based on incomplete information, and George challenging you to weave their way in between them. Yeah, throw that in the comments. Is Larys responsible for the death of Harwin and Lionel? I will see you guys in a couple weeks.